Hi guys, so I'm going to be making pastillage today. I'm going to give you some basic ideas, so maybe if you want to start thinking about in the fall when you do your centerpieces, what you might want to do. So these are some elements that you could use. They're somewhat easy, they're quick, they won't take a lot of time, which in the fall for our buffet we don't want it to take a lot of time. So I'm going to show you two pastillage recipes. One is for thicker, heavier pieces, and then one is for smaller, more delicate pieces to be working with. So I'm going to start with pastillage 2, which is the thicker one, and then I'll go right into pastillage 1. So pastillage 2, bigger of a recipe. We have to use a larger mixer for it, and it takes about 20 to 30 minutes. No one person will need just one recipe. This will be something that you'd be able to share when you go to play with it and use it. For pastillage 2, we have 20 grams of gelatin, 200 grams of cold water, which I've already hydrated the gelatin in the water in a small pot, and we'll warm that up. And then we have 170 grams of powdered sugar and 300 grams of cornstarch, which I already sifted 3 times. If we were going to be doing this for a competition, we might sift it like 6 times just to make sure that it's super fine. But for what we're doing, 3 is more than enough. So I put those, and that's in a little bit bigger bowl. And then we're also going to use 300 grams of vinegar. And I will give you guys all these recipes so you have them. And these are recipes that I get from Ewald Notter. So these are his recipes and some of his techniques. A book that if you enjoy working with this, I encourage you to get. All right, so what we're going to start with is we're going to take our gelatin and we're going to warm that up. It needs to sit in the cold water for at least 5 minutes. So we're going to warm this up just to dissolve the gelatin. When dissolving gelatin like this, just straight on the stove, you want to make sure you don't bring it to a boil. When we're working with pastillage, gelatin is like gluten for bread. So it's going to be our strands that hold the product together and give it strength. So we want to make sure we go kind of slow, and we're just going to heat this just till it's all dissolved. So swirling it around, making sure it gets dissolved. This gelatin is, I use gelatin powder, and it is what we have on campus. It's the powder is our gold gelatin, so that means it's our strongest gelatin. So strongest means it's going to have more strength because it's got more proteins in it. All right, once when it looks dissolved, I'm going to turn it off. This particular gelatin, that's gold, there are some variations, but this particular one has a 225 bloom. All right, so once when the gelatin is dissolved, we are going to add it to our powdered sugar and our cornstarch. And we're going to add our 30 grams of vinegar. We're going to use the dough hook, and we're going to let this mix on the mixer for 20 to 30 minutes, and I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. All right, so my pastillage 2 is ready. So what we're going to do now is we're going to roll out our dough and shape it as soon as we get done using it. So, or as soon as it gets made. This dough does not hold very long. It sets up even faster. If you look at it, it kind of reminds me of the, there's that foamy stuff that you can buy now that's kind of like Play-Doh, but it's thicker and airier. And so that's what this reminds me of. So I'm going to take this out, and then when I look at it, Parts of it is really nice, and area part of it is still a little bit thick, so I'm just going to roll it just a little bit to make the consistency nice and even. And it will dry rather quickly. So what I want to do is I'm going to divide this in thirds, and I'm going to wrap them in plastic wrap. And then I'm going to work with just 1/3. So what I'm looking for is, this is my desired shape. It's a little bit of a thicker shape. So I'm going to use my 1/2-inch rods to get a consistent thickness. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by getting it close to the shape that I want at the end. And then I'm just going to roll it so it's nice, even, and smooth. Now this recipe, you're going to have to sand it after it dries anyway, but we want to get it as close as we can to start. And then when you're working with things, you always want to get thinner at the top and lighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of press it just a little bit more so that I have a little bit of a thinner part at the top. And then from here, I'm going to move it onto a board. This is a foam board, and I'm going to dust it to make sure it doesn't stick. Make sure that it moves. All right, we don't want it to stick to our board. And I'm going to lay my stencil on there. And with a sharp knife, I'm going to cut my shape. Now this is going to be the bottom. There's going to be a nice L shape to it. I'm going to pull away my excess pieces, and then I'll have a nice flat piece. Make sure when you have a piece like this that you need it to be flat on the bottom and straight up the sides, that your pastillage is exactly that shape before you leave it to dry. And then I always do more than one piece. So we're going to take this and we're going to roll it out again. All right, so I'm going to re-roll this piece of pastillage. I'm going to put a little bit of powdered sugar down. I'm going to get it close to the shape that I want it at the end. Put my rods so I get my thickness. Double check. Yeah, I should be able to have the right width down here. It was looking a little narrow, so I was double checking the width. So this is all a 1/2 inch. Move my rods out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and roll this just a little bit thinner. Get my board, put just a little bit of powdered sugar on there. We don't want too much. And then we're going to, you can even flip it over, make sure you don't have too much powdered sugar on the sides, because this will stick once when it dries. So we're going to flip it over, make sure it moves, put our stencil on. Get your nice clean cuts. The cleaner you make these cuts, the better your end result is going to be, the less sanding you have to do. So I have a towel with hot water, standing by, and I'm cleaning my knife because last time I did this, I was getting some pastillage stuck on it, which made this next cut not as pretty as I'd like. So, go hold my stencil. Pull off the excess pastillage. Remember, this is pastillage 2, this is thicker, and this is why you make pastillage 2, is for thicker pieces of pastillage. All right, double checking to make sure I have my 90 degrees because this will be standing against another piece. And so I want to make sure it's flat and straight. All right, it looks all cockeyed, there we go. So I'm gonna let this set, and in about an hour, I'll flip them over to help them to dry. Pastillage, if you don't flip it over when it's drying and you want it to be a flat piece, it will start to bend on its own. So you want to make sure that you flip it over, not only keep it from bending, but also so that it dries a little bit more evenly. Right, so for pastillage 2, the one that's thicker, something else we can do is we can take some of the pastillage, put it in a plastic bowl, has to be a plastic bowl, and then we put it in the microwave and we watch it kind of bubble up, and then when it starts to go down just a little bit, we take it out of the microwave and then we let it cool down, and then we just kind of pull on the plastic bowl a little bit, and then we can unmold the pastillage, and it gives us this cool kind of spacey rock or corally type of effect. So when you are doing your centerpiece in the fall, if you wanted an underwater theme, this would be a neat technique to use for part of an accent piece and to add texture to your centerpiece. So I'm gonna remove both of these. I did one in a large bowl, one in a small bowl, just to kind of see the difference. This is what happens when you cook it a little bit too long, but you still have lots of it that you could still use. So it's just kind of got some really neat texture to it. So I'm going to save this and put this all aside. Okay, so now we're going to work on recipe 1. These are, for this pastillage, we want to use things that are more delicate and light, and I'm going to show you a whole bunch of different shapes you can make with this. You can make little accent strings, you can make flower petals, flowers, and some other things. I'm going to show you what we're going to do with those. So for this recipe, I use 16 grams of powdered gelatin that is dissolved on 132 grams of cold water. So I have it here and I've let it set for 5 to 10 minutes. And then in this bowl, I have powdered sugar, 850 grams of powdered sugar, and 150 grams of cornstarch that I've sifted together 3 times just to make it a little bit finer. So just like with our pastillage 2, we are going to warm up and dissolve our gelatin without bringing it to boil. All right, so again, this was cold water and gold gelatin with a 225 bloom. I'm warming it up till it's dissolved after letting it soften, bloom for about 5 to 10 minutes. And when it's dissolved, I'm going to let it sit just for a minute longer to make sure that it is completely. I'm going to add this to my powdered sugar and my cornstarch. I'm going to put some water in here. If you don't, the gelatin tends to set up and it's hard to get out at the sink. So I like to put some water in there, bring it to boil just to help make it so it's easier to clean the pot. And this is going to go on the mixer with the dough hook. Evil Notter says to mix it by hand, but I just find it's easier to do it on the mixer with the dough hook. So I do this one there as well. All right, so this dough will get really stiff and start to move, so make sure you put your arm brakes on. Then raise the bowl, and we'll mix this at 2. And what we're looking for is this to be a little moist and to start to come together and kind of look like a fresh can of Play-Doh is kind of the texture we're looking for. So moisture in this recipe is very important in the pastillage. So with that cornstarch, it tends to dry out rather quickly. So having enough moisture when you're putting it together is super important. And it's much easier to correct the consistency of the moisture on the mixer than it is by hand. It can get a little tiresome if you try to do it by hand. Another thing that we want to use for pastillage to make it a little bit easier to work with is warmth. So having that warm gelatin really helps to help it to come together, and it's going to make it easier for you to work with it. So this dough is starting to come together. When it first came together, it kind of had a little bit of an off-white tinge to it. So we're looking for it to be smooth. We want it to be moist. And we also want it to have a little bit more whiter appearance in it. This is looking a little dry. So one of the advantages of the way I like to clean the pot is you have hot water. So just a little bit at a time makes a big difference. So I'm going to use a tasting spoon to add just a little bit of water. I want this to be a little bit sticky, but not super wet. Again, this dries very quickly. So if you start with it at the exact right consistency as far as the amount of moisture in there, it's going to go to dry very quickly. So I like to start, before I take it off the mixer, make sure it's a little bit sticky, and that way I have a little bit more time to play with it. Occasionally I stop the machine and I pull the dough in just to help it to be very evenly distributed. And you can see the outside dough tends to be a little bit drier than the inside. So what I'm looking at and what's telling me that I'm almost there is the inside still looks moist and my outside looks moist as well. It looks a little bit drier, but not as dry as it was before. So I'm gonna stop this, take it off the machine, and I'm gonna work with this by hand now. So like I said, pastillage dries rather quickly. So since it can tend to dry your hands out rather quickly, I like to put on gloves. It's not that you need gloves. It's not a sanitation reason. It's just your hands will get very sticky and very dry very quick. So I'm going to take the pastillage out of here. I'm going to turn it out onto my table. I'm going to soak my bowl and dough hook in water. So I'm going to continue to work with my dough. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it out and then fold it in, kind of like we did when we make croissants, where we did that book fold. And by doing this, what we're doing is we're expanding those gelatin strands and making them longer, which is going to make our pastillage stronger. So you bring this together. And if it starts to look a little dry, so it's really nice, soft and smooth, like fresh Play-Doh, but I want it to be a little stickier. So I'm going to get some water on my hands, and I'm going to use that to get just a little bit of moisture into my pastillage so that I have a little bit more time to work with it. Having a bench or a bowl scraper ready to use is very helpful, because this can get sticky at this point. All right, so I'm just going to roll this a little bit more. So I want this to be very light in color, so it should be white. I want it moist but not sticky, so I'm just gonna roll it till it's no longer sticky. And like I said, this just makes the dough last a little bit longer and easier to work with for a longer period of time by making sure you have the right amount of moisture in there. So when I'm rolling, and I'm bringing it back together, it's coming together quickly, whereas before it kept in the strands a little bit longer. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to cut this in half, and I'm gonna immediately put it in a bag. You're gonna get all the air out of it. I'm going to twist it and then have the bag pull back on top of itself. And this will just give me a little bit more time to work with the dough until I'm ready to use it. This will really only, you should use it within the first couple of hours. This isn't something you make a day ahead of time. This recipe is amazing. You can work with it a little bit by warming it up the next day, but it's best used today. So I'm going to store this and then get everything ready for the techniques I want to show you. For Pastillage 1, I'm going to show you a lot of different techniques. Some can be used just for making flowers, or with gum paste. You could use it with modeling chocolate. So this is the Pastillage 1. And so I'm going to start by kind of reworking it, because I was sitting here for a little bit. And I'm going to roll this out. So I'm going to start with making some leaves. And one thing we want to keep in mind is that leaves should be very thin. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we have enough consistency to them that they're going to hold their shape. So the way we go about doing that is we're going to roll this so that you can almost see through the pastillage. Make sure that you don't have a lot of powdered sugar, because that's going to leave a little divot. And I know it won't be much of a divot, but it's enough that it would make a difference for what we're doing. Also need to make sure that your rolling pin is without lumps as well. All right, so we want this to be almost so thin that you can see through it. And there's different ways that you can do this. We can take a circle cutter and we can simply just cut it, and then I want to press down the edges so that the edges don't look so square. And then we can put them in a leaf press. So putting it in here, pressing gently just so you get some texture to it, and then letting it set so that you get some shape, but we don't necessarily want it to be flat. We want to want some texture. So I'm going to do another one. And then a better way to thin those edges is if we put it in a plastic bag. And then this will allow us to be able to press our edges a little bit smoother. A little bit more fluid. And then take it, lay it on the mold, and then press, and then shape. So notice I'm doing this one petal at a time, or one leaf at a time. I'm not working the whole section, because this will get dried out. And it will start to crack. So when that happens, you kind of lost your time. So you want to make sure you're very efficient, you're ready to go, you have all your tools when you're starting to work, and working one at a time. And then that way, when it starts to set up, you could just rework it and do another piece. Okay? All right, so this can be it's starting to get dry and crumbly. So you could warm it up if you needed to, or you could by putting it in the microwave, you'd warm it up, and then you could just knead it also. And sometimes just the warmth of your hands will help to bring that back together. We have enough of this, so I'm just going to set this aside for now. All right, so I showed you how to do leaves. For petals, for our flower petals, it's the same general idea. I warmed this pastillage, this is a very small piece. I warmed it in the microwave for like 6 or 7 seconds, so it really doesn't take very long. And I'm just kneading it, making sure that it's nice and smooth. I'm going to lightly dust my table. I'm going to again roll this to be super thin, making sure that I'm moving my pastillage and making sure that it does not stick to the table. But at the same time, I want to make sure that I don't have too much powdered sugar or any lumps underneath. So I'm going to go really thin again. All right, so thin that I can see through it. So when you're building something like a flower or a leaf, remember you want to think of how thick is it in nature? What does it look like in nature? And so that's why we want to go so thin I can see the wood grain through it. And if we go thin enough, then we won't have to do the edges quite as much. So what we're looking for is we want petals and we want them all to be the same shape. So what I've made here is a stencil. And so what we can do is we can take the stencil, put the cut piece of pastillage on there, and then make sure that we cut it the correct size. All right? And then we're going to go right into a mold and let it set until it dries. And it won't take very long for it to dry. So I have 2 sizes of petals that I want to make for my flower. So I'm going to do this with each one, making sure that my size is consistent so that when I build my flower, they all look very close to the same size. So it's not perfect in nature, and I don't expect it to be perfect here, but you do want it to be somewhat close and not to be way off the mark. So we need about 18 of these big ones. And then we need about 10 of these small ones. So we're going to do the same method for the small ones. And so the small ones will be for the inner part of our flower. So you could do, if you wanted, a different PVC, or you could keep the same size depending on what you're looking to do. All right, so some other pieces that you can make is just some general accents. So just warm this up in the microwave. Again, a little bit of powdered sugar to keep it from sticking to the table. Roll it out. It's pretty thin. This doesn't need to be quite as thin as we did before with the petals and the leaves, but we still want it to be pretty thin because when you have a thin accent, it just always looks more delicate and it looks nicer on your centerpiece. So I'm just going to take a knife and score the pastillage, and I'm just going to make some nice long triangles. you can make some thick, some thin, different sizes. And then I'm just going to set them on my sheet pan that I have here. In some different ways. So I'm just gonna like set some up to look wavy. You can have them be kind of twisted. You could put a bag or some plastic wrap and have it go around that just to give it a little bit of a different a shape. You could put it around a skewer. So just something so that we can add a little bit of movement to our piece and shape to our centerpiece when we go to put that together. Another technique we can do is we can take a little piece of the pastillage. We can roll it out to a nice skinny shape. And once when you get it close to there, you can take a round or something flat, and then you can roll this to be a nice long cylinder. And then before it sets up, kind of try to use your palm of your hands when rolling this, because you don't really want fingerprints into your piece. Also, you want to make sure that you roll it to a fine point to start, because that's the part that's going to break the fastest. And then once when you have it, the board is mainly just to get it to a little bit smoother shape. Warm this in my hand again. Start rolling it again. So notice I didn't just work with it, I also stated that I was warming it in my hand. So if it's too cold, this is going to be difficult to work with. So we want it to be as thin as possible on the end, because that's going to give us a more delicate shape when we're done. And so we're going to just make some of these to be kind of corkscrewy and some different accent shapes. Roll it out, make sure it comes to a very fine point at the end. And then from there, you just roll it out, gently pressing to make it smooth, to make it consistent. And then you could even make it into a corkscrew if you wanted to, and wrap it around something. And letting that set up. And just doing a lot of different shapes this way. Make sure you don't press too hard, because if you press too hard, it's going to be flat. It's not going to be rounded. So again, starting with it as a point. Getting it close to the shape that you want at the end. And then just kind of letting it roll underneath. Not pressing too hard, but just kind of smoothing out that shape. You could also do a nice little bend, is always a nice little accent to add to. So I'm going to make some more of these.